Welcome to the Trueface Podcast. My name is Robby and I'll be your guide as we have conversations about what we can learn from what's going on in our lives. Most of us get stuck in our relationships with God and with others, and we end up wondering, is this really all there is to it? Here's a question. What if God isn't who you think he is and neither are you? The grace-based relational discipleship resources at trueface.org will help you answer that, to help you live into your true identity. And this conversation with my friend Brett will help you do that, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Please remember to subscribe and share and join the growing tribe of Jesus followers by going to trueface.org. So part of these resources that we're really excited about, one of them right now is the Trueface Journey. You can go to truefacejourney.org or go to trueface.org and check out the Trueface Journey. But Alpha is a framework for relational evangelism, right? That's had a lot of impact around the world. The Trueface Journey is a framework for group relational discipleship. It's a 9-month, monthly 3-hour meeting that helps people experience and trust these truths in relationships. And so a passion point of mine is that men and women who get grace and love Jesus and want to fulfill the Great Commission of pouring their cup into others and making disciples aren't doing it. That's because we don't know how to do it and what to do. That's why we developed the Trueface Journey to help you, help churches implement a leader development pipeline for you to invest in a group. So go check out truefacejourney.org. Now's the time to start preparing to launch a group in August and September. And all right, I'm jumping into the podcast because I got to get Brett on here. Brett is a new friend, Brett Clemmer. If you don't know him, he joined Man in the Mirror in 2000 and has served as the president and CEO of Man in the Mirror since 2016. He's spoken to men and trained leaders for Man in the Mirror, both in the U.S. and internationally. Man in the Mirror equips Christian men around the world to engage in meaningful relationships that change lives and build the kingdom of God. You can check out more at maninthemirror.org. And more importantly, Brett is married to his wife, Kimberly. They've moved outside of Orlando, which is where we last hung out, where they raised 2 fantastic kids. And he regards being a husband and a father as his 2 primary ministries. So Brett, I'm super excited as you've become a close friend in a short amount of time. Welcome to the Trueface Podcast, man. How are you?
I'm great, man. That hits my heart when you say that too. Thanks. I appreciate that. It's been fun.
If you're listening to this on podcast, you're missing the strong executive presence that Brett has. He's got his nice leather chair and his black bookshelf behind you. So I'm just going to paint the picture for the audio listeners in here. And Brett, what else did I miss anything about Man in the Mirror that you'd want us to hear or know? It's an awesome ministry. Pat Morley founded it. Is that right?
Yeah. Man in the Mirror was founded as a Bible study in a bar 37 years ago and has grown over the years. And now we're a ministry that focuses primarily on helping churches disciple men well and engage every man in their church in discipleship and then equip those guys to reach other men. And so we've got area directors around the country, 50 area directors around the country, a growing ministry in Asia, and it's just a blast. So
Brett and I got to hang out a few months ago in a cool cabin with some cool guys, and we were talking about how do we align different ministries and ministries to men in this setting. How do these ministries align to move the needle for the sake of ministry to men in our country? And we've been working on some stuff collectively, and it's amazing when you see different parachurches and churches come together behind shared passions. And there's such a humility in those environments that it's like, oh my gosh, why does this feel rare in the church? Because we should be the best as the church in coming together. And what's the quote, like in essentials unity and non-essentials I don't know what the
in essentials unity and non-essentials, liberty, and
Yeah,
in all things charity.
that's right. And like pretty much everything that most parachurches, denominations, argue over are non-essentials, and it leads to unnecessary division. So it's been really encouraging for me watching these different ministries have humility. And Brett, you have modeled that. So that's one thing that connected us. Just me watching you model humility and go, here we go. How can we help? How can we serve? How can we come together for the greater good?
Yeah, that's been a great group of guys. I love the different theological traditions everybody comes from, and yet, like you said, they're unified around Christ and around really wanting to help men figure out how to live as believers in this kind of crazy world that we're in right now.
Yeah. So speaking of crazy world, it feels like in all of our stories, as I love to have friends on here and guests to process stories of their life and what God has taught them through that. It's amazing that our Father knows how He made each of us, and that each person listening to this has had difficulty and trauma, and difficulties look differently for everybody based on their own story. But it's amazing how we have a Father that redeems and restores and draws us to Himself. And that feels a little preachy as it's a Monday morning as we're recording this. But it really is like His grace is like we have such a weird theology of surrender and difficulty. And even as we listen to each other, it's like, well, that was terrible. Your mom got shot in front of you. Or, oh, that wasn't terrible. You lost a 6-figure job. Or it's like we compare and contrast. And it's like, no. This process of following Jesus is not easy. And He redeems and weaves in and speaks to us through all of it. So I'm excited to hear more of your story as we get to process each other's stories and think personally about our own stories. And I don't know why that disclaimer came up, but I'm excited to listen to your story.
Oh, wow.
And hear how God has woven His grace into your life.
Yeah.
So tell us about Brett to the broader.
Well, the big picture is I'm a New Englander by upbringing, not quite by birth, but I was there early. So I'm a big Boston sports fan, and just wish my teams were living up to their potential this year. But enjoying watching, I enjoy that. And I married a preacher's daughter in 1991, and at a time when neither of us were really walking with Christ. Both of us were very good at going through the motions, and but we got married, and I dragged her to Florida to. I was going to work for my dad. Excuse me. I was going to work for my dad, and I'll tell you, if there's any young guys listening to this, lesson number 1: don't marry your wife and then make her go live with your parents or close to your parents, and then work for your father at the same time. Just not a good way to start a marriage. And she was miserable. But that business didn't work. My parents luckily moved away. I love my parents, but it was good for our marriage that they moved away. And then I kind of found myself in the nonprofit world here in Orlando in the social service sector. So I worked for a really large homeless agency, a 700-bed homeless shelter. And it was great. I love that job. We were really innovative. We did a lot of cool stuff. We had a Boys and Girls Club like right on site on the shelter site, and had elementary school on site. And we had the first Girl Scout troop in a homeless shelter, as far as I know. And so we just did a lot of cool stuff. But one of the things that I got involved with was I like big picture stuff, as you've experienced. I like big picture stuff. And so in our community, we were recognizing that a person that touched one social service agency on average touched 7. So we thought, well, these people are going from place to place to place to get the services they need, food in one place and education in another place and drug treatment in another place. And they're going place to place, and they keep having to tell their story over and over again. And the story changes over time, not sometimes because people are trying to get over on the system, but usually just because they're tired and frustrated. And this was the 90s. And so, we thought, well, we should have some kind of a computerized system of some kind. And so I got involved with a community-wide effort to create a database, a community-wide database. So this is in the 90s. So this is before, the internet had really taken off. Al Gore had created it, but it really hadn't taken off yet. And so we literally in a partnership, we created a database system, and then Darden Restaurants, which is Olive Garden and Red Lobster and those folks, they were on our nonprofit board. And so they donated a computer system that was complete dial-up. So we had, at the beginning, we had like 10 or 12 agencies on it. And so every night the database would call all 12 agencies and upload all their data from the day. And then after it did that and it processed it all, it would call everybody back and download the data. And so that we thought we were pretty cool, and other communities started contacting us about could they buy our system. And so we decided to be social entrepreneurs. So we spun off a for-profit subsidiary of the not-for-profit just to do the software stuff, because it was sitting in another not-for-profit. And after about 6 or 9 months, the not-for-profit didn't like owning a for-profit software company. It just felt too risky to them. And so I talked to my dad, who is involved in the finance world, and I said, "Hey, do you want to help me buy this company?" And so we bought it away from the not-for-profit organization, and started, so we just became a software company. So in 1998, I had a software company, and it was a great time to have a software company. And, things were really roaring. And in 99, we did $1 million in sales. We had 6 employees and 1 salesperson, and that was me. And so I would go anywhere, anytime to talk to anybody about the software. And so we had clients, we had county governments as clients, we had United Way organizations as clients, and we were really doing well. And so by the end of 99, we're up to 36 employees, and bought our largest competitor, and venture capitalists started getting involved with us and giving us benchmarks to meet so that they would put money in the company. And we were hitting benchmark after benchmark after benchmark. And the problem was I had 2 toddlers at home and a wife who was getting more and more frustrated because I was gone all the time. I was either traveling or I would put in, 12, 14-hour days at the office. And I had this tremendous sense of responsibility for the people who'd put money into the company, because they call the first round. I call the first round of funding for a startup company the 3 F's: friends, family, and fools. And and so it was friends and family money in at the beginning. And so I was working hard. I was gone all day or gone completely. And one day I had a phone call with my wife, and to tell her that I had another last minute business trip, and I was kind of apologizing. I was like half apologizing, half making a sales pitch to her about why I needed to go on this trip and why it was going to be another great opportunity. And she said a sentence that changed my life. She said, "That's okay. It's easier when you're not here." And I was kind of like, "Wait, what? What do you mean?" And so I kind of, we're on the phone. So I kind of got off the call, and I got home that night, and I said, what do you mean it's easier when I'm not here? And she said, "Look, I get it. You're trying to build this company, but you're up before the kids wake up. You're home oftentimes after they go to bed, so they hardly know you. And when you are home, you're grumpy because you're exhausted. And the only time we really have good conversations is when you're 1,000 miles away in a hotel room at night and the kids are in bed and you and I actually have like a decent conversation on the phone. So like, don't worry about it. Just go on your trip. We're fine." And, obviously all of those are warning signs of things that you don't want to hear your wife say. and really just not sure what to do. The funniest part about this is, in the meantime, like while all this is going on, we're super active in our church. We went to a big mega church in Orlando that's 7 services a weekend. We were doing sometimes all 7 services in children's ministry. We were leading worship. I was doing large group teaching and, puppets and costumes and skits and all this fun stuff with the kids. And so I had gotten myself into this cycle where I would abandon my family to go build my business. And then I would rush home on the weekends to minister to other people's kids. And then I would abandon my family again on Monday to go build my business. And I really didn't know how to get out of the cycle. And of course, everybody that looked at us thought we were doing great. Here I am with a beautiful wife and a couple of tow-headed kids, and we're in church all the time and have lots of friends in church. And, but really just miserable, and our marriage is really suffering. And I didn't realize it at the time, which is probably a good thing because I would have done something stupid, but I didn't. My wife was actually beginning to think about, how do I tell my dad, my pastor dad, that I'm not really sure my marriage is going to make it. And so I'm like, I don't know what to do. She doesn't know what to do. And then the market starts to tank. And so in early 2000, the tech market crashed. All the venture capitalists who had given us all these benchmarks just vaporized, just went away. And I'm working harder and harder to try to save the company. And I get a phone call from a friend of mine at church, and our wives were in a small group together. And so he said, hey, I think we should get all the husbands of these women that are in this small group. I think we should have a guys group, if for no other reason than just to protect ourselves, because I'm pretty sure they're talking about us. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure they're talking about us too. And I said, I grew up in the church. I walked the aisle at 5 years old in a Baptist church, and my parents, very godly people. And so I knew, like, if you're going to have a small group, you got to study something. So I said, what are we going to study? And he said, I don't know. They gave a men's book out in church a few weeks ago. Go find that men's book and just bring it. And so I show up on a Tuesday night with the book that they'd given away in church a couple weeks before. And that book was The Man in the Mirror and 24 Common Problems Men Face. And, the first chapter is the rat race. And I understood that. And the second chapter is leading an unexamined life. And I understood that. And the third chapter is are you a biblical Christian or a cultural Christian? And I'm like, now I'm mad because he wrote a book about me, right? And so I'm in this group with these guys, and my company's struggling. At first it felt like we were going to make it. And I'm in this group with these guys, and then another weird or frustrating thing happened. We're like 4 or 5 weeks into the group, and it had gotten into this thing where, like, you'd get there and you'd say, how was your week? And you'd say, oh, I had such a blessed week. God really blessed me this week. And then the next guy would say, I had a really rough week, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I'm like ready to vomit on the table. I'm like, this is crazy, stupid, useless, not helpful stuff. And so I remember I like threw my book on the table. I said a couple swear words, and I said, I can't do this anymore. And they're like, what? And I said, you guys don't understand. Like, my marriage is falling apart. My business is falling apart. And we're just sitting here like everything's okay. Like if we just believe enough, everything's going to be okay. Or if we just say the right vocabulary words to each other, everything's going to be okay. And the guy next to me goes, I can't believe you said that. And I was like, oh, here we go. I'm about to be judged. And he goes, can't believe you said that, because, like, I'm struggling with porn and nobody knows about it. Mm-hmm. And then the next guy said, yeah, my marriage is in trouble too. We're both in second marriages, and we're both so damaged from our first marriage that, we can't trust each other, and it's wrecking this one. And the next guy said, yeah, my business is struggling too. In fact, I just took a second mortgage out on the house to make payroll, and I haven't told my wife yet. And, big, chunky stuff. And we're going around the table. And then we get to the last guy. The last guy's name is Jim. And Jim, by the time we get to Jim, Jim's eyes are like saucers. And he's like staring at his book. And he looks up at us and he goes, actually, I'm doing pretty good. Like, for real, I'm doing pretty good. And he's like, I don't really know if I should be in this group with you guys. And we're like, Jim, you can't go anywhere. You're like our only hope, that there's actually, like, you could actually have a decent life here. And so from that moment on, that group of guys, we just locked arms and we held each other accountable, but, not like the legalistic accountability that I see with a lot of men's stuff, but like relationship-based accountability. So, for instance, as I shared about my wife's frustrations and my frustrations with traveling so much, they started making me bring my calendar to the group. And they would look at my calendar and they'd be like, do you have to go on this trip? Do you have to go on this trip? Can you cancel this? Like, you're gone too much next month. And, all of, we did that for each other, a lot of us, and we did camping trips together and took our boys on adventures and for about 3.5 years, that group of guys was just incredibly tight. And then, over time, somebody moves away and somebody's job changes, and that was okay. But it was just a fantastic season, and it turned things around. So at the end of 2000, the companies basically started to spiral. We've gone from 36 back down to 5 employees again. The venture is not going to happen. We know the venture is not going to happen. We had sort of one final last gasp, huge contract that might have been okay and might have made everything okay, but we couldn't. Our financials, they wouldn't. No, we couldn't. You had to get a bond, and we couldn't get a bond, and so I realized then that we were done. And so I told the last few employees, I'm like, go find jobs. I can pay you for another month or so. And I told my group, and Jim, the guy that was doing okay, says, hey, I think Pat Morley's looking for somebody like you. And I'm like, Pat Morley, where have I heard that name? Like, the book's in my hand. And I'm like, you mean this guy, the guy that wrote this book? And he's like, yeah, didn't you read the back cover? He's like got a ministry in Winter Park, Florida. And I had no idea. I was reading the inside of the book. I hadn't even thought to read the outside of it, And so he gave them my resume. Another buddy of mine from church gave them my resume, and they actually called me about a week later and said, hey, we've gotten your resume from a couple of places. I think we're supposed to talk to you. And so the first Friday in November, we shut the company down. I went to a bankruptcy attorney's office and handed over the keys to the office, and you just walk away. It's a pretty wild experience. And the last Friday in November, I walked into Man in the Mirror as a new employee, and I was petrified. I had almost wrecked my marriage. I had taken a company into bankruptcy. You don't like offer those things at your job interview. It's like, I'm not going to share my failures unless you ask me directly. I found out later they knew everything. But I was walking on eggshells for the first few months here. And then the other thing that happened to me as a result of that is, I'll tell you 2 quick things. One is, as the company is going down the toilet, one Tuesday night when our group met, I called my wife and I said, hey, honey, I think I'm just going to come home tonight. I'm not going to go to my men's group. I'm exhausted. I'm weary. And she said, hey, when you feel like this is when you need those guys the most. So don't come home. Go to your group. We'll be here when you get here. And I said, are you sure? And she said, the next sentence that she said, do you know how much better of a husband that you've been since you started going to that group? Go to the group. So it's like, all right. So then I get here and I met this guy named David Delk, and he was the president, executive vice president when I got here. Pat was the president, and that sort of changed over time. And David and I used to go on walks every day. There was a convenience store that was about a 8 or 10 minute walk away from the office. And most mornings we would walk up to the convenience store in the middle of the morning and grab a soda, grab a big gulp, and then walk back. And we did that for 16 years, probably at least 3, sometimes 4 and 5 times a week. And I actually estimated that we probably spent 25,000 minutes talking on those walks over 16 years. And he was only a year older than me, but he was miles ahead of me spiritually and just a really mature guy, different temperament than me. Like we very quickly just got down to talking about real stuff right away. So I got discipled by this guy. I get discipled by this men's group that I was in, and all guys locking arms and really diving into scripture and diving into difficulties and, applying it, not just head knowledge, but heart and hands. And then God puts me in this place with David. And, I had so many rough edges to sand off. I still have a few, but, David took the brunt of many of those. And, it's just an amazing relationship. And I talked to him first thing this morning on the way in. He hasn't been at Man in the Mirror for 6 years, and we still talk pretty regularly. And, so that's kind of the way that God's built me.
How, man, all of that going down. First of all, thanks for sharing. And for those of us who have read Bo's Cafe, it's like such a beautiful image of Andy and Steven, the David and David walking with you that many years, and like as part of that process of maturing. And how old were you at that transition of the business failing, your ministry being on the rocks, making that transition?
Yeah, I was 34. I was 34 when I just turned 34 when I got here.
What would you have, like when you were 30 and you had 30 employees? I mean, you're in tech, you're in a software tech company in the late 90s. You got 2 little kids. What would you tell yourself then? And could you have heard what you would tell them?
That's a great question. I think I would have told myself to, from a business, I'll tell you straight up from a business standpoint, like emotion is your enemy. You need to look at the numbers and just really be brutally honest with yourself, about what it's going to take to succeed. And I think we were so hopeful and a little bit we're all social service people building a software company, and we hired the software people, the programmers and that kind of thing, but we turned a passion into a business, and which is fine, but you got to bring some business. I wish we had brought some more business people in earlier. When we finally did realize, when we grew so quickly, and then we started bringing some business people, and those people started raising the alarm, almost from the moment they were there, like, hey, here's the risk factors. So just from a pure business standpoint, that's one thing. I think the other thing is just like, I was really lying to myself a lot. I was totally taken over by ambition. I'll tell you, I think it's funny. Some people think it's pathetic, but you remember the Dilbert comic strip?
Yeah.
Well, Scott Adams wrote a business book at one point. And in the back of it wasn't a business book. It was a book of Dilbert comics, but in the back, he wrote a little appendix. It was like a little mini business book. And he talked about visualization. He talked about how everything that he had visualized, that he had really set as an intentional goal, he had accomplished. And his trick was, and keep in mind, I'm an idiot at this point, but his trick was he would write down whatever that goal was every day on a piece of paper 10 times. So I want to have the number one syndicated cartoon America. I want to have the number one syndicated cartoon America. So he would write that down. And then eventually became the number one syndicated cartoon in America. And I want to have a best-selling book. And eventually he had a best-selling book. And so I was trying to think of what would define success for my company. And so I decided that the definition of success would be me being on the cover of Inc. magazine. Mm. And because every month I would read Inc. magazine every month, and every month it had a software entrepreneur on the cover, and they all had these incredible stories. And so I thought, I'm gonna write down. So I took a Post-it pad, and every day I would write down on the Post-it pad 10 times, I will be on the cover of Inc. magazine. I will be on the cover of Inc. magazine. And then I had a desk, and I had a little pencil tray inside the top desk drawer. And so every day I would write that down 10 times. And then I'd open my drawer and I'd pull up the pencil tray, and I would put it underneath the pencil tray. And so the bottom of that drawer just had rows of Post-it notes, and, a couple, 3 or 4 deep by the time I stopped doing it. And in my mind, what was going to happen was a reporter was going to come from Inc. magazine to interview me in my office. And I was going to very dramatically open my desk drawer and pull my pencil tray out, and then put all these Post-it notes, and just like the power of positive visualization, like I was some guru or something. I was so stupid. But my ambition was selfish, and we wanted to do good things. We were helping social service agencies work more efficiently and effectively and help them serve people better. But, I was also looking for fame and fortune, and just totally caught up for a time, totally caught up in that. And so it just, having your head screwed on straight.
It's interesting, like the positive language, there's principles of wisdom. Like, you're going to be the culmination of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with. If you listen to like a certain podcast all the time, every day, that focuses on investing in watches, right, you're going to be a watch investor. Like, like that positive thing. Yeah. We were talking at our Trueface journey 2 nights ago with our couples. And we were talking about how do we remind ourselves of the truth of who God says we are in our identity? Because that's like the slipperiest thing. And that's where, you're talking about your ego, underpinning all this stuff. So what should we, the sticky note thing isn't inherently bad. It was off about magazine thing. So have you done that ever since, of affirmations of who you are now?
I'm just, it was so contrived for me back then to do that. And I was trying to be somebody that God didn't make me to be. And I don't mean like owning a company, a successful company. Yeah. I mean, that's fine. But just like this sort of, esteemed, revered, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs kind of guy. Like, that's just not who I am. And
I say that because this morning in my, I've been struggling with some anxiety about something coming up, and I'm having a hard time trusting God with it. So I'm I can't, what is this? And we were talking in our group, I can't believe that I'm really made righteous. And so why don't we read those verses every morning, to replace those lies with the truth. And this morning I was listening to Maverick City music, I shall not want, your goodness and your mercy are following me.
Yeah.
Got everything that I need, your goodness and your mercy. And so I listened to that song twice. So I thought about those words, probably 20 or 30 times. And it was a moment of real depth of gratitude. So I was doing your sticky note this morning, hopefully in a healthier way.
Yeah. Much healthier.
So what would Kimberly say to you at 30? What would she have said to you at 32?
Ooh, um, I mean, she did say some things because we went to counseling. uh, but I think she would have said, I want to be loved and led, and you're not doing either of those things. You're giving all of your best to everybody else, and I'm getting what's left over. And she would have been totally right. I mean, she did eventually say some of those things
Mm,
to me, and I will tell you this. One of the great things about counseling was um, that it wasn't all my fault. Like, I was doing my best to build a company, and I really did have relatively, like, I was doing, even though I was doing it for me, I really was excited about putting my wife in a nicer house and putting my kids in good schools and having a secure future. Like, I was excited about those things too. It wasn't all just like money for the sake of money. You rob a bank if that's what your motives are. But I just those weren't the things that my wife wanted. Not that she didn't like nice houses, and not that she didn't want our kids to go to good schools, but she wanted me. She married me, and she liked me. Like, we liked each other when we got married. We didn't, we weren't just like puppy love. Like, we really liked each other, and I really kind of undermined that. And it was 8 years. 8 years into our marriage is a typical time that you sort of start taking things for granted, and can get a little stale if you're not careful. And we had two kids that took a lot of her time and energy, and
for sure.
but yeah, I think she would have just said, we just want you, you know.
Yeah. I So what has helped you maintain a more appropriate balance? Because now you're leading a ministry with equal, if not weightier pools of responsibility than back in the day. So what have you done better in regards to keeping that balance?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, like, since that group, I've almost always had a group of men around me who are challenging me and walking with me. There's been a couple times when I haven't, and man, I've really felt it when I haven't. And we went through a time where we were, well, so that's the first thing. And second thing is, like, always to have a church, to be in church, to be in that community. Not to think that I could, I work for a ministry, and I'm around Jesus-y people all day, every day. I don't really need a church on top of that. It's just, silly. Um, but we went through a time when we were really struggling to find a church. The church we'd been in had some struggles, and I was in leadership, so I kind of was caught up in the middle of those struggles. And a lot of times I will say, like, when you're in leadership in a church, especially a lay leadership, and you help solve those problems, it often costs you your own membership. It costs you your own ability to stay in that place. And that's just a hard thing, because we live in a fallen world and churches are full of sinners. And so we went through a couple years, and I actually I'm working in a ministry, and I'm actually getting really cynical about the church.
Yeah.
And I had a really good friend who we kind of just not spent very much time together. And one day he called me up, and he said, "Hey, we need to talk." And so we sat down, and I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So we went out and hung out for a little while, and he said, "Hey, I need to tell you something." And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, honestly, he just kind of read me the riot act. He's like, "You cannot be this cynical about the church. Like, you're leading a ministry that works with churches. Like, you have to figure out what's going on in your head and in your heart, and work through this, because this is crazy." And he's a general contractor, so his language is very colorful in that conversation. And but he was totally
Yeah.
He just totally called me. And since then we've been best friends, and his name's Jesse. And so eventually Jesse convinced me and Kimberly, my wife, to go to this little church that's like a mile from our house, which I love the idea of that,
Yeah.
that I could be at a church that's close by. And my wife didn't like it at first because it was small, and she likes big churches where she can hide. Now we're in a small church where there's no hiding, everybody knows everybody. And so Jesse got us to go to that church, and about a year into it, he's like, hey, he was an elder there. He's like, hey, there's only two of us. We need another elder. And I really like you to think about it. And I was like, I don't know. I've done that before, and it was really painful at the end. But you know what? I love you guys, and I'd love to come alongside of you. So, so I spent a year in their preparation examination process, and it was fantastic. I mean, I had to root through some things that I was still holding on to, and these two guys just loved me so well. And so last November I became an elder in that church, and these two guys that I've locked arms with, one, and we were talking about this yesterday. Like, one of us, the teaching pastor, is very prophetic, very, very intellectual, very theological, and a dynamic preacher. And then Tim, or Jesse, my friend, is more, he owns a contractor. He's very directive. He's sort of the hands getting things done, sort of, kingly almost,
Yeah.
and then I'm like the relational, part of I'm the heart and affections part of the group. I'm the priestly guy. So it's really interesting that God's brought us together. They didn't plan that, but just these three roles that we play within our little flock of a couple hundred people. And that really keeps me grounded. That's that little flock of 200 is as important or more important than what I do vocationally, even though vocationally is ministry, and it does have a wide effect. But I've got a dozen employees in the office and folks around the country, but I got 200 people right in front of me at church every week, and that I'm responsible for.
I love, I didn't know like a lot of these parts of your story, which is really fun for me to listen. And my notes in front of me, just processing, going, God, what do you have for me in this? I'll reflect back some of what I heard.
Yeah.
That back to your men's group, the power of vulnerability begets vulnerability. Like the leadership you had to model vulnerability and the wave of trust, of grace that came on the backside of you breaking through that wall is one thing. Also about the grace-based accountability, like what is healthy accountability? Again, as we both know, accountability typically focuses on the sin or the act, and protection focuses on the person.
Yeah.
And I heard that, like, you had protectors,
right,
protecting you from your weakness, going, let me look at your calendar. I love that story of like, hey, show us your calendar. It's not accountability. It really was protection. They were protecting you, protecting Kimberly. And the next one, the other note I had is just that more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact.
Amen.
I hear about David Delk with 25,000 minutes over 16 years. As I know enough about David to know his leadership chops and how intentional and strategic he is. And that is incredibly inefficient, and incredibly, like, unproductive, and shouldn't he be doing better stuff with his time? And how much you and I would go, heck no. And how Jesus would go, are you kidding me? Are you saying that the same about me? And just how awesome that is that David did that. The next one are the two connected to enemies, which was fun, about like in my own emotion is the enemy. Let the numbers speak in regards to business
Yeah.
stuff, and ego is the enemy. Like checking the motive of like what's driving the
Yeah.
pressure and responsibility. That's current for me. Just I have something that what's driving me is my ego, which is not. I've had a hard time trusting God with something coming up that I'm nervous about speaking because I don't want to be embarrassed,
Yeah.
and I don't want to let the ministry to. And God's like, really, like I mean, just it's all about me and not my motive for preparing well is not for people to hear truth more clearly. It has been so that I don't get embarrassed, which is humbling and ego. And then uh, the last note I just took was that um, your church's level. You slid this in there, and I took a note of it. We can talk offline about it, but the over a year, and then you were like, yeah, and then over the year through a development process, it was unearthed all this stuff. That intentionality of an elder development over the course of a year is like, oh man, that sounds awesome. We're not doing that with pastors, elders,
Yeah.
leaders in the church. I mean, even that, I want to know more about your church. So I say that to reflect back and say thanks for sharing your story for me this morning and with the broader Trueface tribe. As we wrap up, I'll leave you anything you want to leave us with, Brett, as we wrap up and the tribe listen to this. But check out manmirror.org. They have a lot of great resources for your churches, and check out Trueface Journey for a 9-month framework to spend more time with fewer people for greater kingdom impact. And Brett, thank you for being on the Trueface podcast and my friend. And what would you like to leave the tribe with as we wrap up?
Uh, Man, I have no like big huge words of wisdom. I love you. I love your honesty and openness and the I think the biggest frustration that I have is with people that are just so caught up in religion and in appearance and in always just so focused on either their behavior or somebody else's behavior. And there's real freedom in letting that stuff go and just focusing on who Jesus is, who God is, the fact that he made you, the fact that he really truly actually completely has everything in his control. He's really a sovereign God, and he's so, so good. And when I rest in those things, the worries and cares of the world, they don't go away, but they become less strident, and so rest easy.
Man, this is where I'm that guy that comes in with a thought because that just triggered my last note that I didn't respond. Amen. Let it be so. And one of the notes I have down here is that when Kimberly said to you, like, when you said Kimberly liked me and wanted to spend time with me, wasn't as interested in the things that I could do for her, I was like, oh, Heavenly Father, don't you say the same thing about me. Like, you just like me
Yeah.
and you want to spend time with me and you don't need me to do anything
Right.
to the religious landing. So that was beautiful.
Amen.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Father, for seeing us that way. Even though I wish sometimes I could do more to earn your love, it is not healthy, and that is my ego. So God, let it be so. We love you. We trust you. Thanks, Brad. This was fun.
All right, buddy. Thank you. Love you.
Bye.
See ya.
Love you.